Hi, my name is Felipa, and today is day 85 out of 365 days of my reading plan to complete this Bible. So today I started on chapter 18, where it says, so still in the first book of Chronicles, where it says David subdues the Philistines and the Moabites. So once again, this section of the Bible is recounting all the stories that we've talked about, and this is how David is continuing to kill everything kind of in his path because he's got God's will behind him. So he kills the Philistines, subdues them, took Gath, her towns out of the hand of Philistines. He kills Moab and the Moabites, and they become his servants, and they bring him gifts. He kills Hadarezer, the kings of Zobach, onto Hamath, and establishes domain by the river Euphrates. And we keep going on into the Syrians of Damascus, who came to help Hadarezer, king of Zobah, and where David ends up killing the Syrians as well. And then we have a small recap of how King Tou basically sends Tou, king of Hamath. Here's how David has killed all these individuals, and he sends Hadaram, his son, to King David to congratulate him because he was also conveniently in a fight at some point with Hadarezer and had war with him. And so there's an exchange of gifts and gold. A recap once again of that story that we read about earlier, where David's messengers are treated shamefully because Nahash, the king of the children of Ammon, died. His son ends up reigning in his stead, his son Hanun. David wants to show kindness unto him because his father showed kindness to him. He sends messengers to comfort him after his father passes. But according to some of his disciples or some of his servants, it says that the princes of the children of Ammon said to Hanun, this king, that they think that David is not sending messengers to honor his father, but he is instead sending them to come out to search and overthrow and spy on the land. And so then he takes David's servants and he embarrasses them greatly. He shaves them, he cuts off their garments, he exposes their bums, and he sends them away naughty. And so when David finds out about this, he sends for his men because they are greatly ashamed. And he says, just rest in Jericho until your beards are grown and then return. And then the Ammonites are basically hurt in this whole ordeal because David defeats them and Syria. And it continues to say in here throughout that God continues to be in the favor of David and all that David is doing and how he is overtaking every sort of kind of civilization that he comes across. Then David defeats Rabbah. It says that came to pass that Joab led forth the power of the army and wasted the country of the children of Ammon and came and besieged Rabbah. But David tarried at Jerusalem, and Joab smote Rabbah and destroyed it. Continuing on, David continues to have victories over the Philistines once again. This is a little section that talks about a war against the Philistines, as well as the war or battles against Goth and people of massive stature, so essentially giants, and how Jonathan, the son of Shimea, David's brother, ended up killing this giant. And very, very interestingly here, in chapter 21, verse 1, we have the first time that the word Satan is mentioned. If anybody wants to correct me, please do. If that is not the case, I do think that I have a fairly good memory. And if I looked back and I think back on everything that I've read thus far, I cannot recall there ever being the word Satan. So this is very interesting. But this is a story recounting how David essentially told Joab to go and number Israel and count the people, and how God was angry with him for doing so. And so this chapter is started with the statement of David, tempted by Satan, takes a census. And so we continue on to this section where essentially God is mad at him. He sends a message through one of God's servants, God, G-A-D. And he says, David, because you've sinned, you'll choose one of the three. In verse 12, it says, either 3 years famine, or 3 months to be destroyed before thy foes, while that the sword of thine enemies overtaketh thee, or else 3 days the sword of the Lord, even the pestilence in the land, and the angel of the Lord destroying throughout all the coasts of Israel. Now therefore advise thyself what word I shall bring again to him that sent me. So kind of like an interesting way to kind of punish somebody. You are getting them to choose their punishment. And so David says, you know, I will fall upon the mercy of God, but don't let me fall into the hand of man. So he would rather face God's wrath than fall on the sword and be overtaken by his enemies. And God ends up coming back to him, and he sends a pestilence across all of Israel. Israel loses about 70,000 men, and God sends an angel into Jerusalem to destroy it with a massive sword. And here in verse 16 it says, "And David lifted up his eyes and saw that the angel of the Lord stand between the earth and the heaven, having a drawn sword in his hand, stretched out over Jerusalem. Then David and the elders of Israel who were clothed in sackcloth fell upon their faces." And David actually begs for mercy from God, and he says, "Why? Please don't do this. I have sinned. Don't let people be punished for my sin." And then we see that the angel of the Lord commands Gad to say to David that David shall go up and set an altar unto the Lord in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. He purchases Ornan's threshing floor, and we end the chapter here where, "And David built there an altar unto the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings and called upon the Lord, and he answered him from heaven by fire upon the altar of burnt offering. And the Lord commanded the angel, and he put up his sword again in the sheath thereof." At that time, when David saw that the Lord had answered him in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, then he sacrificed there. And so this is where we end this piece. And in verse 30 it says, "David could not go before it to inquire of God, for he was afraid because of the sword of the angel of the Lord." So we have David's sin, David's repenting and punishment as a result of that sin, and him trying to save his people and bear the punishment that he so deserves on his own. So that is it for day 85. Tomorrow's day 86 out of 365 days. And I start with how David helped Solomon prepare for building the temple. And I will let you know what else I learned from here on out. I appreciate you for listening. Thank you for being here.